Owen's tone was like a gleaming knife pressed against my throat, the arrogance in his voice thick enough to choke on. He tossed a stack of documents across the polished mahogany conference table, and the papers scattered as if fleeing from the force of his triumph. His expression, a perfect mask of self-satisfaction, said everything. This empire is mine now. He practically purred those words, his confidence stifling the air in the room. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out a worn leather folder, the one I had been carrying around for months, the one holding the ammunition I needed. I placed it in front of him with a firm push, letting its weight speak for itself. "You're mistaken, Owen," I said calmly, my voice as cold as ice. "You're the one who has nothing." For the barest moment, I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of confusion. He hesitated before picking up the folder, and in that moment of hesitation, I felt my first small surge of victory. He had no idea what he was about to uncover, no clue that I had prepared for this day with a relentless dedication that bordered on obsession. Before I tell you how we ended up here, let me take you back to when it all began. Let me show you how, step by step, I prepared to steal Owen's world right out from under him. The sky was the color of lead the day we buried my father, William Ashford, a titan in the construction industry. He built skyscrapers, bridges, entire districts that bore his name on the silver plaques. Yet, all of that power and influence hadn't been enough to save him in the end. The funeral took place on a raw afternoon, the wind carrying the scent of rain and withered roses. The gathered mourners spoke in hushed voices, offering their condolences in carefully measured tones. I stood by the casket, my mother Harriet at my side, watching as my father's coffin was lowered into the earth. My sister Eva stood next to me, her face pale, her eyes rimmed red. And Owen, the man my father had trusted, the man Eva had married, stood apart from us, silent, unreadable. Even before I discovered his betrayal, there was something about him that felt cold, predatory, like a wolf disguised in a well-tailored suit. Later that evening, we assembled in my father's study. The room was soaked in memory. The rich smell of leather and old books, the faint scent of his pipe tobacco lingering in the air, as though refusing to vanish despite the finality of death. Our family lawyer sat behind the large desk, clearing his throat nervously as he began to read the will. And to my son-in-law, Owen Blackwood, I leave full control of Ashford Enterprises. The words struck me like a physical blow. Eva let out a small, sharp gasp, tears brimming in her eyes. My mother reached for my hand, her grip trembling against my skin. In that moment I felt my world tilt sideways. My father had built this empire from the ground up. He had always been proud of the Ashford name, proud of his legacy. And now, it was all being handed to Owen. My daughter Eva shall receive a trust fund for her family's security and well-being. Eva's shoulders sagged. She stared at the floor as if she'd just lost the only security she'd ever known. To my daughter Dahlia, I leave my most cherished possession, my 1972 vintage pickup truck. A hush fell over the room, so profound it felt like my ears were ringing. Truck. Not shares, not property, not a place on the board. A battered old Chevy pickup that my father had kept in the garage for decades. I might have laughed if I wasn't so numb with shock. That's it. I whispered into the silence. That's everything. The lawyer coughed again, his eyes darting from me to Owen. I could see pity there, or maybe it was fear. Owen, however, seemed positively gleeful. He shifted in the leather armchair, crossing one ankle casually over a knee, as if he'd been born to occupy my father's space. A truck, he repeated, a mocking edge in his voice. That's all your father thought you deserved. He made an elaborate show of examining his nails, a smirk crawling across his face. Not that you need more, Dahlia. Go ahead, keep it. Maybe you can drive away and pretend none of this ever happened. My hands tightened into fists, nails digging into my palms. But I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me lash out. Instead, I swallowed my bitterness and forced my voice into a calm hush. It meant something to him, I said, carefully holding Owen's gaze. It had to. Eva tried to speak, tried to defend me or our father's decision, but the words failed in her throat. She looked torn, locked into a marriage she had grown to fear, a marriage built on illusions I hadn't fully grasped yet. My mother looked at me with stricken eyes, as if she wished she could rewrite the day's events with a wave of a hand. That night, I stood in the darkened driveway, the truck keys cool in my grasp. I stared at the old Chevy, its paint once a brilliant sky blue, now faded and chipped, the rust creeping along its edges. I opened the driver's side door and slid behind the wheel, letting the worn leather seat cradle me. The engine coughed to life on the first turn of the key, and I flicked on the overhead light. There, propped against the dashboard, was an envelope with my name written in my father's tidy handwriting. "Oh yeah, if you're reading this, it means I've gone. And if I know Owen, he's wasted no time staking his claim. But don't be fooled. He thinks he's won. He hasn't. I trust you to set things right." My eyes traced each sentence, heart thudding, breath catching in my throat. Did my father know what would happen all along? Why would he leave the company to Owen, if he had no trust in the man? "I have my reasons, Dahlia," the letter went on. "Trust me. This truck is more than it seems. It's the key to finding what truly belongs to our family. I couldn't leave Ashford Enterprises in your hands without a fight, because Owen is someone who fights dirty. I needed him to reveal himself, to get comfortable enough to make mistakes, to believe he has everything under control. Only then would you have the chance to strike back. Seek out the truth. The records, the evidence, the documents I've hidden in the place you'll know to look. Trust your instincts. And Dahlia, sorry, I should have told you sooner." My father's signature sealed the final line. I read the letter 3 times, refusing to let a single tear escape, refusing to let grief dull my fury. It was as though he was still guiding me, even from the grave, setting a path I never expected to walk. Because this wasn't just about an old truck anymore. It wasn't just about an empire. It was about a man who'd betrayed my family. It was about exposing a traitor hiding beneath a veneer of respectability. The next morning, I tried to talk to my mother and sister, but neither seemed ready to confront the reality that was quickly settling around us. My mother was in shock, reeling from my father's death, while Eva was tethered to a manipulative husband she no longer recognized. Owen was quick to make changes at the company. He entered my father's office, settled into that high-backed chair, and started giving orders to the board, to the executives, to everyone within earshot. He loved that power, loved watching people scramble to obey. "You should leave, Dahlia," Owen said to me when I confronted him in the office lobby, where my father's portrait still hung. His voice dripped with condescension. "There's nothing for you here. Go find a new life. This place, these people, they've already moved on." I stared at him with cold resolve, my jaw tightening, my nails cutting into my palms again. I said nothing. I turned on my heel and left, letting him imagine he'd intimidated me. If there was anything I had learned from my father's letter, it was that I couldn't strike until I had the ammunition to destroy him completely. I drove that old truck far from the city that day, following a hunch fueled by the letter's cryptic instructions. The roads bled into the countryside, winding like a coiled snake, until the bright lights were replaced by rolling fields and patches of forest. I had no idea what I was looking for, but a flicker on the worn GPS screen guided me to a narrow lane. At the end stood a small cabin, hidden behind thick pines and brush. The windows were dark, the air damp with the promise of rain. Inside, I found dust motes floating in the pale light that filtered through the grimy windows. A single wooden table rested in the center of the room, where a heavy lockbox sat, sealed tight. Beside it lay another envelope, also addressed to me in my father's familiar script. The key for the lockbox was taped beneath the table. "Dahlia, if you've come this far, then you're ready for what comes next. These documents, these files, they're the blueprint for taking back what belongs to our family. Keep them safe. Trust no one. Especially Owen." I opened the lockbox and stared at its contents. Bank statements, property deeds, old letters, official stamps, and a flash drive. My father had hidden an entire second empire here, under everyone's noses, A network of assets Owen had no idea existed. I realized, with a twist of emotion, that my father had orchestrated everything. He had purposely left the main company to Owen, so Owen would expose his greed, so he would believe himself unassailable. Meanwhile, the real power, the real money lay in wait. It became a game of shadows. I returned to the city armed with the knowledge of these secret holdings. I started by contacting board members at Ashford Enterprises discreetly, the ones who had remained loyal to my father, who might still remember me from when I was just a girl peeking around the corners of the offices. I showed them carefully selected pieces of evidence. Suspicious withdrawals, funneling of company funds, questionable acquisitions. All roads led back to Owen. One by one, those board members began to question his leadership. The seeds of doubt were planted. Next, I started leaking rumors to the business press. Nothing direct enough to raise alarms that I was the source, just carefully positioned bits of information that hinted at fraud, that suggested the new head of Ashford Enterprises might be mishandling money. As I predicted, Owen tried to stifle it. He threatened lawsuits, demanded retractions, all the while not realizing he was leaving a paper trail of intimidation that further implicated him in unethical behavior. Eva was the hardest piece of the puzzle. My sister had once been so full of life, so bright and hopeful. But marriage to Owen had drained her spirit. She confessed to me that he'd grown controlling, shutting her out of financial decisions, alienating her from friends. She was afraid of him, afraid of losing custody of their young son if she tried to leave. That fear coiled around her like a snake, suffocating any attempt she made to break free. I promised her that if she helped me find whatever additional evidence she could, bank records, phone calls, overseas accounts, I would make sure she and her child were safe. It wasn't easy. Some nights, I'd wait in my car outside the penthouse she shared with Owen, my heart pounding as I wondered if she would slip out with a file, or if I'd see glimpses of something darker behind those tinted windows. Sometimes I heard shouting reverberating through the walls. Sometimes it was just silence. But Eva was strong in her own quiet way. She managed to gather snippets of data, little puzzle pieces that fit perfectly into the bigger picture I was assembling. Step by step, I watched Owen's mask begin to crack. The board asked more questions. Shareholders raised concerns. The media demanded interviews, which he refused. On the outside, he still tried to appear composed, but I knew the signs of a man unraveling from within. My father had taught me that when someone has built their kingdom on lies, all it takes is a single truth to bring it tumbling down. Finally, the day arrived. I told the board I had conclusive proof of Owen's misconduct, asked them to convene an urgent meeting. They scheduled it, albeit nervously. Nobody wanted a scandal, but they were starting to see that scandal was inevitable with a man like Owen at the helm. On the morning of that fateful meeting, I walked into the conference room, old truck keys in one pocket, father's lockbox documents in my briefcase, and determination pulsing like fire in my veins. Owen was there, leaning back in the CEO's chair as though he owned the world. The second I stepped through the door, he aimed that condescending smirk at me, the one that once made my blood boil. "Dahlia," he said with mock courtesy, "this is a closed session. You don't have a seat at this table." I quietly placed my briefcase on the table, opened it, and removed the thick folder of evidence. Without a word, I slid it toward the board members. Their eyes flicked down, scanning page after page of misappropriations, secret accounts, falsified statements. Owen's smug expression faltered, replaced with something closer to panic. Before he could protest, the board's legal counsel cleared his throat, turned to me, and asked me to explain the documents. So I did. Calmly, systematically. I walked them through each transaction, each shell company, each layer of deception Owen had built. And then, as the final blow, I presented proof that I now controlled more shares of Ashford Enterprises than he did, courtesy of the hidden assets my father had prepared and some carefully orchestrated purchases I'd made through proxy investors. Owen's face went pale. "You can't do this," he snarled, leaning forward. "You think anyone here will side with you?" I glanced around the table. I saw the wary expressions, the flickers of outrage as they read the evidence. Slowly, one by one, the board members nodded. The chairman looked to me and spoke in a somber voice. "We can't allow this to continue, Ms. Ashford. Owen, we have no choice but to request your immediate resignation as CEO." Resignation? Well, I won't resign, he spat, hands clenched on the tabletop, knuckles whitening. But the board had already seen enough. They voted unanimously to remove him, to strip him of the title he had gleefully flaunted since my father's death. He stood, slamming his fist on the table, fury contorting his features. I said nothing, simply watching as security ushered him out of the room. My mother and sister were waiting in the hallway. Eva's eyes locked onto Owen's for a moment, and in that silent exchange, I saw a chapter of her life closing. She didn't weep or shout. She simply turned away as he was led past her, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a spark of hope in her face. But the final blow to Owen came days later, when the authorities confirmed they were opening a formal investigation into his financial crimes. Everything he had built was crumbling, every ally he had was turning away. He was indicted for fraud and embezzlement, with more charges looming as the investigators dug deeper. Amid this chaos, I found myself once again in my father's old study, the locked box in front of me, its contents strewn across the desk. There was a letter I hadn't noticed before, tucked away in a hidden compartment at the bottom, sealed with my father's old signet ring. Inside, I found a single line in my father's handwriting. "A good truck, Dahlia, will always take you where you need to go, even if you're not sure where that is yet." I traced the words with my fingertips, remembering the Sunday afternoons when he let me sit on his lap to drive, remembering how unstoppable he'd seemed, remembering all the times we'd butted heads. And I realized I wasn't angry with him for leaving the company to Owen. Not anymore. Because he had trusted me to finish the job. He had known I'd do whatever it took to preserve the Ashford legacy, and to protect our family. With Owen gone, Ashford Enterprises needed a new leader. The board offered me the position of CEO, wanted me to put my father's name back on the door in the grand style they thought it deserved. But I declined. My sister, my mother, even some of the board members were puzzled. They asked me why. I explained that my father had spent his entire life devoted to that company, but he'd always told me to follow my own path. I wasn't built for a corner office, for the constraints of board meetings and quarterly profit margins. Instead, I nominated a trusted colleague of my father's, a man named Bernard who had stood by the company through thick and thin. Bernard was honorable, capable, and had none of Owen's dangerous ambition. Under Bernard's guidance, Ashford Enterprises would flourish the right way, reflecting my father's true intentions. At last, I found myself outside the building one final time, the city lights gleaming off the steel and glass exterior. My mother stood beside me, a warm hand on my shoulder. Eva, holding her son, offered a small, grateful smile. Owen was gone, and though the scars of his betrayal would linger, our family was free. "Are you sure this is what you want?" my mother asked softly. I looked at the truck parked at the curb, that sturdy old Chevy with chipped paint and a roaring engine. I felt a surge of something bright and exhilarating deep in my chest. "Yes, I'm sure," I replied. Sliding into the driver's seat, I breathed in the familiar scent of sun-warmed vinyl and old motor oil. My father's words echoed in my mind as I gripped the wheel. There would be new roads ahead, new opportunities to explore, now that I was no longer weighed down by the war for Ashford Enterprises. I turned the key, the engine rumbled to life, and a sense of calm washed over me. In the rearview mirror, I saw Eva holding her little boy close, my mother standing with her arms folded. I felt their pride in me, felt the final resolution of a journey that had begun the moment my father's coffin was lowered into the ground. Owen's shadow no longer stretched over us. Weeks passed, then months. Owen's trial was swift. The evidence was undeniable, and he was sentenced for his crimes. Eva divorced him, gaining full custody of her son. In a quiet show of mercy, I chose not to appear in the courtroom, not wanting to gloat or even see the man who'd caused so much damage. Let justice take its course. Life for me became simpler, calmer. I spent more time traveling, something I'd always longed to do but never could while I was entangled in the drama at home. Sometimes I'd take the truck on long road trips through endless highways, with nothing but the hum of the engine and the rolling landscape to keep me company. It felt like a quiet homage to my father, a way to honor the gift he left me, both the truck and the courage to stand up for myself. One afternoon, after a stretch of scenic driving along a coastal road, I parked the Chevy near a rocky shoreline. The sea breeze whipped my hair as I hopped out, gazing at the waves crashing against the cliffs. I closed my eyes and remembered that final letter. A good truck, Dahlia, will always take you where you need to go, even if you're not sure where that is yet. I had found where I needed to go in the end. I had found my voice, my strength, and the truth about what my father really wanted for our family. I could almost hear him laughing softly, proud that I had proven how wrong Owen was when he sneered that I had nothing. 'Cause I had everything. I had my independence, my mother, my sister, and my nephew's bright smile. I had a future that was mine to shape, free from the clutches of greed and betrayal. And so, though I had waged a war in business suits and conference rooms, I emerged with more peace of mind than I'd ever known. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I'd wonder how different things might have been if my father had survived a little longer, if he'd confronted Owen personally. But then I'd realize that, in a twisted way, it had to happen exactly like this. My father had given me the tools to protect our family and to find my own strength by forcing me to stand up to a powerful adversary. It was a gift hidden behind heartbreak, but a gift nonetheless. As for Ashford Enterprises, Bernard steered it toward innovation and integrity. He installed new ethical guidelines, made sure the board was transparent about its finances, and over time the company's reputation soared. My father's name became synonymous with honorable leadership once again, rather than the scandal Owen had nearly drowned us in. That alone felt like a victory worth cherishing. Eva, newly free, channeled her heartbreak into opening a charity foundation, dedicated to helping women trapped in abusive or controlling relationships. She turned her own fear into a beacon of support for others, ensuring that no one else would have to feel as powerless as she once did. I donated part of the hidden assets my father had left to help her get started. She named the foundation William's Light, in honor of the father who had hoped for a better world for all of us. Mother rediscovered her passion for painting. She filled the house with canvases bursting with color, sunsets, portraits, abstract images that sometimes reminded me of swirling cityscapes or lonely highways. Maybe she was capturing our journey, from mourning to new beginnings, from sorrow to hope. Whenever I visited, the scent of fresh paint mingled with the memory of my father, and it felt like stepping into a living tapestry of our family's resilience. No matter where I drove in that old truck or how many miles I put behind me, I always knew one thing. I had found my own road. Owen's sneer, his dismissive smirk, those mocking words, "You have nothing," had become the very catalyst that propelled me toward everything worth having. Months later, on a rainy evening, I found myself back at the cemetery where my father was buried. The sky rumbled with distant thunder, and droplets tapped against the roof of the Chevy. I turned off the engine, stepped out, and walked toward his grave with slow, deliberate steps. The headstone glistened under the rainfall, the lettering sharp. William Ashford, beloved father, visionary leader. I stood there for a long moment, letting the rain wash over me, each cool droplet a reminder of everything that had happened. I could almost feel him there, a comforting presence that cut through the loneliness of the storm. "I did what you asked, Dad," I said softly, finally voicing the words I'd rehearsed so many times in my head. I protected Mom, I stood by Eva, and I saved Ashford Enterprises from the man who thought he could steal it all. I hope it's what you wanted." A gust of wind stirred the branches overhead, and for a fleeting second, I felt an odd sense of warmth, like a gentle assurance from somewhere beyond. I wiped the water from my eyes, not sure if it was rain or tears, and offered a tremulous smile. "I'm okay," I whispered, half to him, half to myself. "Really, I'm okay now." I walked back to the truck, my footsteps squelching in the damp grass. The engine roared back to life, as steady as ever. As I drove away, the rain lightened, the clouds parted, and for a brief moment, a beam of pale sunlight cut through the gloom. It felt like a sign, a small but poignant reminder that even after the darkest storms, there's always the possibility of light. The months that followed were filled with rebuilding. I found a small place by the river, a home base for my travels, somewhere that felt rooted without being suffocating. I still consulted with Bernard occasionally, ensuring the transition at Ashford Enterprises remained smooth. But I spent most of my time writing, reflecting, figuring out what I truly wanted in life now that vengeance was no longer my driving force. I realized I wanted to help others navigate the same treacherous waters I had. I began speaking at seminars, sharing my experiences of uncovering corporate malfeasance, of standing firm against intimidation, of uncovering hidden truths that threatened to swallow the unsuspecting. My story was raw, real, and it resonated with people who had faced betrayal in their personal or professional lives. Before long, I had offers to consult for other companies wary of potential internal corruption. I picked and chose the ones that felt right, never letting money overshadow the purpose. In quiet moments, I sometimes wondered about Owen, what corner of the world he'd been left to after the courts stripped him of his power. I knew he was serving time at least a few years, but that eventually he'd be back in society, a man with a tarnished name. A part of me, the part that still remembered the devastation he inflicted, hoped he'd learn something from his downfall. Another part, more cynical, suspected he'd remain the same, always looking for an angle. Regardless, he was out of our lives, and that was enough. The day Eva finalized her foundation, I was there by her side, wearing a simple dress, the truck keys always in my purse. She cut the ribbon with a determined glint in her eyes, her little boy clinging to her leg. The applause from the gathered crowd was thunderous, and I felt a surge of pride. Eva had found her calling just as I had. Our mother stood at the front, tears shining on her cheeks, the camera flashes capturing a moment that was simultaneously an ending and a beginning. Afterwards, we stood together in a quiet corner, the hum of the crowd fading into the background. Eva slipped her arm around my waist, resting her head on my shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved us." I shook my head gently, pressing my lips together. "No, we saved ourselves." Dad just pointed the way. Harriet smiled, brushing her hand across my hair. "He would be proud of you both. This is what he wanted. A strong family, united by more than just business and money." In that instant, I felt an overwhelming surge of gratitude. For my father's foresight, for my sister's courage, for my mother's unwavering presence, and for my own resilience. We had walked through fire, but we had emerged intact, stronger even, with hearts that still dared to hope. Night descended as I pulled away from the event in my truck, the engine's low purr almost comforting. The streetlights illuminated the roads with a soft glow, guiding me through the city that had once felt so claustrophobic. But now, it felt like home in a way it never had before because I wasn't trapped by it anymore. I was free to leave or stay as I pleased. I rolled down the window, letting the night air fill the cab. My mind drifted to the final confrontation with Owen, the adrenaline spike I felt as I revealed the evidence, the triumphant sense of justice when security escorted him out. I remembered how, in that fleeting moment, he'd looked at me not just with anger, but with genuine fear, as though he couldn't fathom how the nothing he had dismissed could bring him to his knees. But that was the thing. He had never really seen me, never guessed the depth of my resolve. He had been so blinded by his own pride that he overlooked the possibility that a single determined woman could unravel his entire kingdom. He had no idea that my father's greatest legacy wasn't Ashford Enterprises at all. It was me, and the unbreakable spirit he had nurtured in me, even if it took me years to realize it. Eventually, I parked by the water, an open stretch where the reflections of the city lights danced on the dark surface. I turned off the engine, letting the silence envelop me. My father's letter was tucked safely in my glove compartment, the same letter that set this story in motion. Pulling it out, I read those lines once more, the ink slightly faded. "Trust your instincts, Dahlia. And remember, I'm proud of you. Always." A lump formed in my throat. The night was still, the wind barely stirring, as if holding its breath in anticipation. Maybe my father was out there, somewhere, watching and whispering that he always knew I'd rise to the challenge. The next morning, I awoke to sunlight streaming through the windshield, realizing I had dozed off in the truck. There was a feeling of renewal in the crisp dawn air, a sense that I was standing at the threshold of a new chapter. My father was gone, but his love and guidance had lit a path for me through the darkest tunnels of betrayal. Owen was a memory now, one that no longer held power over me or my family. When I finally stepped out onto the pavement, I took a deep breath, letting the morning light wash over my face. This was a world shaped by second chances, by resilience, by the will to fight for what was right. I felt it humming in my veins, urging me onward to whatever I would do next. Turning back to the truck, I placed a hand on its hood, the metal cool beneath my palm. "Thank you," I murmured, not entirely sure if I was speaking to the old vehicle, to my father, or to the unexpected journey that had brought me here. Because it was this truck that led me to the cabin, to the lockbox and the truth. It was this truck that symbolized the legacy my father wanted me to embrace. That real power lies not in money or corporate titles, but in loyalty, love, and the courage to stand up against injustice. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove off, the sunrise stretching across the horizon, painting the sky in pastel pinks and golds. I had no rigid destination in mind, just a feeling that wherever I went, I would carry my father's lessons, and my own hard-earned wisdom with me. The city gradually receded in my rearview mirror, and I allowed myself a small, contented smile. Because sometimes, losing everything you thought mattered is precisely what it takes to find out who you really are. And as I drove down that open road, the hum of the engine steady, the wind whipping through the open window, I finally understood the truth. Owen had never been able to take away what mattered most. My father's faith in me was unbreakable. My love for my family was unshakable. And my own sense of purpose was finally free to blossom. He told me once, long ago, that the soul of a person can't be measured by business deals or bank accounts, but by how we choose to act when the odds are against us. I had faced those odds, stared them down, and emerged with my family intact. That was my victory, my treasure, the legacy that no one could steal. The road stretched on, endless and inviting. I pressed my foot a little harder on the gas, felt the truck surge forward, and let out a soft laugh that carried all my relief, all my memories, and all my hopes into the bright new day. Because in the end, it was exactly as my father had promised. A good truck, like a strong heart, would always get me where I needed to go. And this time I was finally going there on my own terms, with the sun warm on my face, the engine's roar in my ears, and the knowledge that I had not just survived. I had won. And that, more than anything, felt like the happiest ending of all.